Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Talking Futures. My name is Alex and today we are joined by Sue Anstiss. Hi Sue.
Hello, hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. So Sue, you are the founder of Fearless Women. You host your own podcast called The Game Changers on Spotify. You are trustee of Women's Sport Trust and you've got an MBE for your work in women's sport, which is amazing. It's a really fantastic and impressive career. Do you mind explaining to the VCA students just a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today, please?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So my background at sort of college level, back to that time, I went to Loughborough. I did sports science and English as a degree. And I think I wanted to teach at the time, actually. I wanted to be a PE teacher or an English teacher was my ambition at the time. And then while I was there, I realised I wanted to work in sports sponsorship. So I worked for a couple of years for Cadbury's, actually, selling chocolate at the back of the car. And then I got a job at Gatorade, the sports drink. So I worked for a couple of years in sports sponsorship before they were due to launch in the UK, and they didn't in the end. So I established my own agency 27 years ago, Promote PR, and then across that time worked initially within fitness and then with sports, grassroots sports and elite sport, in terms of sports PR as an agency. And then sadly that the agency didn't survive COVID, so in May this year the agency closed after a quarter of a century, which is very sad, but I've since launched Fearless Women, as you say, and now doing just a real focus on work within women's sport and raising the profile of and generating more impact from women's sport. That's a nutshell of my career history.
No, amazing. So you said that you studied sports science as part of your degree. Did you always know that it was sport that you ultimately wanted to get into, or was it something else that sort of helped develop your career?
Yeah, I think it probably was. Actually, the place I got at university originally was to read English. Got a place. I'd never thought I'd get into Loughborough doing such a high level of sport there. So I went to do English. And then just before I went, I actually asked if I could do the two together. So that's how I kind of chose the sport option. So I don't think I went really with a clear goal of I want to work in sport. I think I just chose the degree in things that I really liked. So reading books and playing sport, really. And it sort of worked out to be quite vocational in the end. But I don't think that was ever the plan. I would like to look back and think, oh, actually, I now write about sport for a living, but that wasn't really the goal when I went there. And so I think I wanted to teach, and I think I was probably just quite open-minded at the time, but knew that I did love sport. So, but I wouldn't say it was a burning passion. I think I was really lucky to have followed what I was passionate about, and I've been really lucky to work in a field. So it doesn't trite, isn't it, that whole one never feels like I've done a day's work in my life, but it does. If you follow and you are able to work in something that you're really passionate about and that you love, it does make working life much easier. So I think I've been really fortunate to just work in a sector that I absolutely adore.
Was there any sport in particular that drove you to study sport at university as well?
Not really. I was a bit of a jack of all trades, really. I swam a bit as a child. I played all the usual things on all the school teams and so on, but I swam and then I did athletics. And then when I got to Loughborough, I realised I was never going to get on the netball team there. So I started to play volleyball. So it was a different sport I tried there. But I don't think I was ever of such a high level of any one sport. For me, it's always just been about all sport and the joy of kind of being within it's probably, I say a team sport, but actually I swam and I ran, which were individual sports. But I think it was just the joy of sport, the whole of sport, really. I wasn't ever a massive football fan or a passionate follower of cricket. For me, I think it was just the sport in itself, the wider sense of sport that I was so passionate about.
Amazing. And now that's sort of what you do with Fearless Women, isn't it? I think you're quite an inspiring person with all the work that you do with increasing the visibility of women in sport. Is there anything or anyone that you would say has been like your inspiration to do that?
I don't know. It's interesting because on the podcast, I'm forever asking people who inspire them in terms of women. And I don't know that I look back and think there was any, obviously some amazing women like Billie Jean King and others who have really made a difference in terms of women's sport and equalities. But I don't know whether there's any one or whether my inspiration is just the value of sport and that I have seen the difference that sport's made to my life and the lives of others around me. And I think the older I've got and the more I've done, I've seen more broadly the impact that sport can have in communities, both in the UK and overseas too. So I think that's probably been my inspiration, is just the power of sport. That I think sometimes people perhaps think it's not trivial, but it's almost something that's a fun element of life and society. But actually, it's so powerful and it's so quite unique, really, in how it influences attitudes in society. It's a thing that brings us all together as a nation and a community. It can have so much impact on your life in a really positive, not just the physical and mental health benefits, but all those positive benefits that come, especially for women and girls too. So I think that's probably been my inspiration almost, is that recognizing the power of sport and wanting to share that and have impact more widely.
Amazing. And can you talk a little bit more about what you do for increasing the visibility of women in particular in sport?
Absolutely, yeah. So I became a board member of the Women's Sport Trust back in 2012, actually, to start Olympic Games. So we do a lot of work behind the scenes, really. So working with broadcasters and with sponsors and rights holders and national governing bodies, just trying to redress that balance, really, to ensure there is more equality across coverage. And it's tricky at the moment with COVID and all that's going on, and women's sport has really been pushed back, and at least now we're talking about it and people realise that's an issue, whereas perhaps 10 years ago it would have been just more acceptable. So what a lot of the work we do is almost like behind the scenes, working with those partners, bringing them together, sometimes calling it out, but not necessarily finger wagging and telling people off, but just helping them to do better and to see the benefits, because actually for many of these sports, their growth in the future will come from women participating, and there's rights to be sold in terms of women's coverage and so on. So it's not just the worthiness of women's sport, it's the fact that there is an amazing commercial opportunity for people to back women's sport. And some of the big brands, the Vitalities and Barclays and others, are beginning to see that now and get behind it. So we're not just doing it because it's the right thing to do, as I say, although of course it is also the right thing to do too. So it's those two arguments, really.
Yeah, definitely. And so you also have your own podcast, as we say. It's called The Game Changers,
Yeah.
which the BCA students can go have a look at on Spotify. And you have interviewed some amazing women, like some real trailblazers in their sport. Is there anyone that's been like a particular favorite for you, or one that you have been, that you loved interviewing?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's some of the names. Obviously, it's been fabulous. One of my goals we're on our 7th series we're entering now, and actually people like Jess Ennis-Hill and Denise Lewis and Gabby Logan and Claire Balding. There are some amazing names, and I was so pleased to get those as guests, and they have been amazing guests. But sometimes it's almost the ones that you will never have heard of, and actually I hadn't heard of until I'd researched, that almost had the more powerful stories that you learn more for the likes of Rose Riley, who's an amazing Scottish footballer who played professionally in France and Italy in the 80s. I mean, it's really funny, very funny and really moving interview with her. And then people like Moya Dodd, who was the first woman on the FIFA Council, just has an incredible view in terms of women in sport and what, the power of that, really. Mary Harvey from the Centre for Sport and Human Rights. So some women, like I say, they're not really necessarily the big names, but in talking to them, I learned so much, and actually they've just got so much to share. So it's been great to get under the skin and kind of share some of those stories. But obviously, it's the Sarah Stories and the Kate Richard-Walshes and the kind of names of athletes that also bring people in, and people want to hear from them too. Yeah, I've been really privileged to be able to talk to them, and I learned so much from speaking and talking with them too.
Yeah, I bet it's a fantastic series, and I really hope that the BCA students go away and have a look at it, because it is really fantastic.
Thank you.
And you've also releasing a book.
I am. Yes. Throw that in lockdown.
Yes. Called Game On: The Unsolvable Rise of Women's Sport. Do you mind talking through that a little bit as well?
Of course, yeah. So that will be launched it's published September the 2nd this year. So I didn't realise that kind of the publishing process is quite a long time to do, from writing the final manuscript to actually the proofwriting and proofreading and editing, etc. So it's at the 2nd stage of editing at the moment, and they're just working on the cover art. So I wrote that in, I guess, last summer, really, during lockdown. So it's really telling my journey and my story to discover why women's sport is so important, why we've been held back so much in the past, and then celebrating the amazing things that have happened in the last 20, 30, or even the last 10 years, really, the biggest differences that have happened to women's sport, and why that matters and what's happening moving forward. So I really hope it'll be a bit of a sort of rallying cry, a bit of a manifesto to people, to give them some of the answers, and then to give them the tools to go and make that change and keep that momentum going. So it's interesting, because obviously I wrote it as COVID hit, really, and So we're all very hopeful that we'll kind of come out of this and the momentum will be maintained for women's sport, because so much has changed in the last decade. It would be so sad to feel we've taken a backward step, which is what it feels a little bit like at the moment. But so it's launching in September, and it'll be aligned to the Rugby World Cup that's taking place in New Zealand, the Women's Rugby World Cup in September. So it's going to be launching around that time. And I would have said hopefully after the Olympics and Paralympics, but who knows what's happening there today. Again, more news. It doesn't feel kind of so positive really for that. So, but it will be happening in September, when hopefully we'll be able to go back into stadiums and play sport and watch sport.
Yes, fingers crossed. I mean, you must get asked this question quite often, but is there a particular highlight of your career? Obviously, you've got an MBE, your book and everything like that, but can you pinpoint a particular highlight maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting. I probably would have said, the MBE was a massive highlight, just because I guess it's like being recognised by other people. I think you do stuff and you're proud of the stuff you do, but it's almost when other people recognise it, it means so much too. And similarly, I think as an agency, when we've won awards, so industry awards and trade awards for the work that we've done, those are always like lovely highlights. I guess we've done some amazing campaigns. We did a fantastic Run Together campaign with England Athletics a few years ago. So I guess we see the work that you do and it has an impact. So where I think about 24,000 women signed up to running groups as a result of the campaign that we ran, and we created some research around what women were scared about running alone, etc. So I guess campaigns like that make you really proud of those sorts of things too. But I think just generally, I was really proud of the agency. It was really sad what happened with the agency, but having seen the people that have come through and gone on to do other things, I look at some of the people that worked with me over the 25 years that are now in amazing roles doing fantastic things elsewhere, and that makes me really proud as well too. So it's probably not one specific thing, but I am kind of proud when I look back at the impact the agency has had, and I guess the work I'm doing now too.
Yeah, definitely. And my final question, which we ask for every person that we interview on Talking Futures, but what would you say is your biggest tip for maybe some of the sports students or any students who might try and follow in your footsteps for a career in sport?
Yeah, it's hard to pick one really.
Yes.
I might give you a couple, but I think definitely remaining passionate. So following your passion, if you love something, I think people do really buy into people when they see you're very genuine and authentic about stuff. So I think that, if you love something, do follow your passion in that, and to be brave. So put yourself forward for things, even though you may feel you don't have the skills or the experience at the moment, not to be cocky, but just definitely I found that in the last few years, I guess launching the podcast and writing the book, and we've launched a collective, a women's sport collective network for women in sport, but just take things on. And I think often with things, the worst thing that might happen is you might get humiliated or be a bit embarrassed if it doesn't work out. But the potential upside is so much more if things do happen. And I think especially for young people at the early stages of their careers, I know from the people I employ that promote, the ones that put their hand up for everything and say, I'll give it a go, even though they may not be the expert at it, but they're willing to try it. I think that's, I guess that's probably the biggest tip, is just, be brave and take things on, and be open to new things, and don't sort of sit within your comfort circle the whole time, because that's the only way that you'll learn and develop, is by failing sometimes, but then coming back and learning new things too. So probably, being brave, I think, and taking things on would be my main piece of advice.
Perfect. No, that's great advice. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, Sue.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
All the best for the book and everything as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Talking Futures, the video podcast that talks to different professionals from different industries. It was brought to you from the Beyond BCA team here at the Berkshire College of Agriculture.